Hey everybody, welcome to Valiant Effort Interacts. How's it going, Nick?
We're here at your place. We're ready to talk Valiant.
And
That's what we do.
And who are we interacting with today?
Your wife, Karyn.
And why? Why are we interacting with Karyn?
I don't know. You know better than me.
Karyn, why are we interacting with you?
Hi, I'm Karyn.
Hi, Karyn.
You're interacting with me because I run a unit in my classroom on Harbinger Renegades. Harbinger Volume
In your
2.
classroom, what do you teach?
I teach English at the high school level, and I use it in my 9th grade classroom.
And you taught what in your 9th grade classroom?
This trade is used in my identity unit.
In Volume 2 Renegades?
Yes.
Yes. In your identity unit, what does that mean?
It is the second unit, so it occurs after a unit on exploring awareness. And it is the launch into that unit where the students get used to looking at how identity in real life is defined by actions and what we say and what we do and what our beliefs are that inform those actions. But before we can figure out what our actions are, we have to But before we can look at characterization, we have to know what our interactions are. So I use the graphic novel as a bridge between real life and characterization in novels. And
Have you ever taught a graphic novel before?
not in this way. I've taught like what are considered the literary great type graphic novels, but never a trade.
Do you find a graphic novel is a better way to communicate with students?
I found that to be the case this time, yes.
Cool. You also teach 12th grade, right?
Yes,
And you teach a graphic novel in that?
I do.
And what is that?
That was one of those grades. So that's V for Vendetta.
And so why does this work for 9th grade and V for Vendetta work for 12th grade?
Well, I could argue this could work for 12th grade as well. But,
Interesting. Good.
the 12th grade one was selected because it's a course on British literature, and I love dystopia. So I chose V for Vendetta because it was British literature that was dystopia, and it fit within my timeline of the way that I teach it. However, when I was looking at what I could fit into the 9th grade curriculum that would appease those learners who maybe are bogged down in text, for instance, I wanted something that was accessible, something that really got to the idea of author's craft, because that's one of those buzzwords in the Common Core state standards. You have to really dissect author's craft. And when a student is given a large chunk of text, particularly a large chunk of text that is of a very high reading level, they get just freeze. They stop. They don't go any further. And they can't think about how an author or why an author does something. But a graphic novel offers the visual medium so that they are looking at both the way things are drawn and the things that are being said. And it's a little easier for them to pick apart the actions and the words which define that character.
Tell us a little bit about your students in particular, because you teach at a unique high school.
I do. I teach at a regional magnet high school, and we are a high school in transition. And so some of our students come to us because they've been disenfranchised by the high school that they went to before. And others come to us because we are a STEM and middle college magnet. So my capabilities range from a student who can only read at the kindergarten level in English to 6 students who are reading and fully comprehending and writing at the college level.
So
all in a 9th grade class.
How did your different students react to reading a comic, graphic novel?
I found that the 6 advanced students were not foreign to graphic novels, to comics in general, at all. They all had previously read comics on their own in their free time, more than just like your comic strip comics. They had actually followed series. And in particular, I have one student who I want to say nearly daily is asking me when the rest of the universe is coming in, because after the success of this unit, where I actually contacted Valiant directly to get the set that I used in my class, after the success of this, we had such a popularity with it that I have put in a requisition order for 1 copy of every trade for the entire Valiant universe, and the students are anxious to get their hands on those and read them.
How do you get them interested in it?
Well, for starters, again, I teach 9th graders, and so that age range is they can go anywhere with an image. And in particular, in Renegades, there are a few panels that are a bit racy, where they are in bottoms up and they are interacting with Charlene as in her stripper outfit. And so the first thing I did was they didn't leave the classroom. The trades were always in my possession in the classroom. And so getting a student interested in reading was kind of the same way I get students interested in English in general. I'm very vivacious and I find a way to connect it with them. So, maybe they weren't very interested in Chris's, particularly my lower level readers. Chris was a bit over their heads. What she would say or do would get chuckles, things they would notice in the background on TV was getting chuckles from some of the advanced students. And the younger students, it was just right over their head. They're like, I don't know how to read this. There's too much going on. I had a whole session on how do you read a comic, where we talked about you start with the left, you go across. This is how you read big panels. When there's a bigger one, this is what this means. So we had a whole session on just how to read a comic to get them going. And I'd lay down some teasers, so I'd say, okay, well, if it's hard to follow this, we'll just wait till you meet Torque. You're going to love Torque. And by the time we got to Torque, they were hooked. And, a lot of them, especially, teenage boys, they really associate with that idea of like being kind of fragile inside, but having to have this big, tough exterior. So
That's interesting.
Why did you choose Volume 2 instead of Volume 1?
I chose Volume 2 because it introduces each of our renegades, and it does so masterfully. The characterization in it is so authentic that it's as if these people are real people. And I needed that. I needed my students to be able to experience with different characters, full characterization development to the point in which, we've become invested in them as characters. And I'm very excited to say it works. Like I said, they want to continue on. In fact, a few of them asked to read the previous volume as well, which I provided them a copy to read off of my laptop.
My God.
Your copy on PDF to read off of my laptop. And they did. They voraciously devoured it, taking turns at the laptop, arguing over who was not reading fast enough so that the other person could go.
That's great.
It very much was.
So you feel that this unit, it really helped you connect with your students?
Yeah, from, in teacher lingo, the unit, the trade in particular, because it has different characters working at different levels, and even as we go through different artists working in different ways, it allowed me to differentiate quite a bit with my students who excelled and who were reading deep into things. And I mean, for a while they were like following symbols that were reoccurring from comic to comic, and then for my lower achieving students, I could say, okay, focus on the art first. Okay, stop worrying about whether or not you understand what the person just said, and why don't we just read that person's face? What is her face saying to us at that moment? Or, why is it that we're seeing it from this perspective? And it made it so that their walls kind of came down. And I was still very much attacking that standard on author's craft, but I was also very much hiding the standard on supporting text with text evidence as well. Because whenever they would tell me, oh, I think this character is like this, I'd say, oh yeah, well, what makes you think that? And then it'd be flip, 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 flip. Oh, well, that panel right there when it says this. They really loved the pun when in issue 6, Chris says something about falling in love, and the panel picture that goes along with the dialogue about falling in love is the helicopter having crashed, having fallen. And so we went into this whole metaphor about how, like, well, how does that reflect what happened to Chris? What happened to her love? And, you got students, even my ones who, weren't necessarily as engaged at that moment were like, oh, well, it went kind of bad for her, right? Like, we talked about how it went bad. And I was like, yeah, it did. And how'd it go for the helicopter? And like, oh, it went bad. They both blew up. And I'm like, yes, we're there. We've got it. And so some got it from the verbal pun, and others had to have it pointed to them. But once they were pointed in the right direction, they read it from the visual. And so it offers great differentiation on that front.
Talk a little bit about when you went to Valiant, and particularly Adam, about how you wanted to do this and how that interaction went. Was it at New York Special Edition?
It started at New York Special Edition, yeah.
Yeah.
So this idea popped into my head as I was looking at changing up what I'd done last year. That's the thing about teaching is you're always on the edge of okay, I'm gonna try this next time, And I've this year begun establishing for every unit text sets so that I'm teaching one theme in one book. as a magnet, my classroom is far too varied for for that to be successful. So I looked at this one in particular and I said, I really think this is going to work to expand my identity unit. And I had been using To Kill a Mockingbird, which is an amazing, amazing book about coming of age. But it did not go well for me last year when I taught it. It was way too advanced for them. The concepts in it came from a place of past tense. We've got Scout looking back on her life, and that kind of separated them from that, right, to begin with. Something that drives Josh crazy in young adult fiction is that it's in the first person.
I hate that.
It's happening to the reader as it happens to our narrator.
I can't handle the Hunger Game books because it's in first person.
Hunger Games, Bella, Bella in Twilight, it's I was doing this, I am doing this, or it does this to me. It drives Josh nuts, but that's what they respond to best. And so I was looking at something to change that up. I said, we've got this idea in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz of, looking for something that turns out you already had, and how that's part of our identity is that sometimes we search for things just to reinforce something that we already have. And I looked at Harbinger Renegades and I said, I really like that. And so when I was at Special Edition, I said to Adam, I'm interested. Adam Freeman, sorry. And I said, I'm interested in doing something with my class. Do you guys, is that something I can do directly through you? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And he gave me his card.
And they were great.
And they were awesome. And then I contacted him right before the school year started. I said, hey, it's that teacher again. And this is what I'm thinking. I said, I've been authorized to purchase a class set of 40 books. And, this is what I want to do. And they absolutely supported that. They thought it was amazing. And so I went right through them. And I'm really excited to share my findings and my artifacts with them.
These 5 stories in the Renegades, they focus on each character differently. Which character did your students connect with the most?
Oh, it's totally varied, man.
That's awesome.
Absolutely varied. Like we actually had a point where every day my class starts off with a free write with a short answer. Was who are you feeling the closest to? It was just a very blanket statement, and they each read, they each wrote, and then one of the students was like, well, rather than just a couple of us read, can we all just stand up? Can we see who else in the room also feels the way we do? And
that's weird. Okay.
Yeah, so they were like, can we just do that? And I was like, sure. So I tend to let students take charge of their learning, obviously a good thing. So I said, sure, go for it. And I gotta tell you, Peter didn't have a lot of backing. He wasn't particularly well liked. It might be because I filled them in on what had happened in issues 1 through 5, and they kind of came into the comic being like, "Oh man, that jerk," and they didn't feel so much that way towards the end. But I think at the point in which we had done it, we had just met Torque, so we had just finished meeting all of the Renegades, and Torque and Flamingo. Obviously, very big. But in the end, the end of the unit, which actually just occurred this past week, the students had to argue in an essay. They could choose from either the Renegades or one of the text set books that they read after the Renegades. They could choose any character they wanted. And overwhelmingly, to argue which character whose identity best exemplifies
in an essay.
In an essay.
Yeah.
They're arguing which character best identifies one of the traits that we at my school actually track as part of something called a character report card. And so we have this list of traits that we actually evaluate our students on. And so it was a way where they were getting something kind of double value for something. The trait was being reinforced to them, that they were being held to, but they were also arguing it in the essay. And I can talk more on that later, but Faith was overwhelmingly, so many people wanted to write about Faith. Very attached to it. I would drop little breadcrumbs about, where things might go later. And Faith was by far, everyone's like, no, Faith is amazing. Faith must stay. And so Faith is definitely, by the end, I think most people's favorite.
And how many of your students wrote essays on the Harbinger books as opposed to the other books in your unit in that?
So I'm pretty excited about these numbers right now. 35 of my 38 students turned in a paper. And I mean, that is like,
because you have some students.
This is a momentous day.
That's hard. Some of your students have difficulty.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think really in ninth grade, I think it's not surprising in many schools to not have an essay turned in. And 31 out of the 35 chose to read on Harbinger, even though we read Harbinger in class together for a week and a half in mid-October. And then they spent all of November, every day of November, in a literature circle reading another book. So the 3 lit circles were The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Ask Me No Questions, and The House on Mango Street, which were all looking at identity again in a different way. And so they spent an entire month with these other characters, and overwhelmingly most still chose to go back to the Renegades to write about.
What do you think it is about that your students connected with that book more? Do you think it's because it's a comic?
I think I can't discount the visual aspect.
Okay.
They are very much visual people.
Yeah. Do you think it's also, though, because these characters are pretty modern? I mean, they're their age.
Yeah. Ask Me No Questions, for instance, is the tale of a high school girl who is she is from Bangladesh, and she and her family are living in New York City right before 9/11, and then 9/11 occurs. And there's all of this cultural shift where they're experiencing extreme prejudice. And so they aren't able to renew their visas. So they're living on expired visas, and they eventually are pushed out of their home, and they try to seek asylum in Canada. And it's all about her trials going through high school despite all of these issues. And that's something they should be able to relate to. It's someone who's exactly the same age. They're in high school. None of the Renegades are shown attending high school. So from that standpoint, I don't think it's to say that they're more like them. I think that my students they're living in a visual culture, and they love that they can see this character in their mind's eye, even when they're not looking at the comic. And so that's something that I think they really are drawn to.
What are the other ones you had them read?
I don't have them with me. So, L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
No, I'm sorry. The comics here. You talk about they mostly connected with Harbinger. What other stories?
So that's all extra.
The unit was Harbinger.
The unit was Harbinger.
Yeah.
Okay.
So everything else was them begging. Everything else came out of the conversation.
And what did you get the most requests for?
I got the most requests for I've got a couple who really want Bloodshot. I have a couple who really want Harbinger. But overwhelmingly, I think that Bloodshot was the one that everyone was like, I want this one. And I was like, guys, there's a lot of blood and guts in that. I don't know if I can bring that into school. And then we'll have my parent write a note. They're gonna be fine with it. So I did break down one day. I didn't break down. I have to be honest. Josh broke down. I had to pretty much beg. I was towards the end of the reading of this unit. My more advanced students had finished their project on, it was a project they got to do exploring the character of one of the characters from Harbinger Renegades back in October when we were reading this. And they could either select a list of songs and make a playlist for their character, or they could draw their own representation of that character if they were artistically
inclined. Yeah, we're looking at a bunch of different pictures we have a picture of Flamingo and Peter and another Flamingo. I'm sorry, Charlene, Nick.
Thank you.
And here's a Faith and a Chris. It's really cool to see the students drawing them. With their permission, we're going to maybe put some of this on our website so that you can see it.
Yep, and they had a couple other options where they could do some writing. They could extend the story. They were allowed to give a character's backstory or
that's cool.
Do things like that. So I had a student who wanted to talk about, wanted to write in narrative the night of Faith's parents dying and things like that. And so, they went back and they did some of those things. And it was around that time, again, the advanced students finished a bit sooner than everybody else, and they're begging and they're begging and they're begging. And I'm like, Josh, please, look, I'm going to order one copy of everything, but it's going to take time for the order to come in. Please, please, please. And he let me take in everything up through, I want to say it was at that time you were recording Perfect Day. So everything up through Perfect Day and all the trades in the Valiant universe, with the exception, I think it was like XO1 was missing, right?
The Planet Death, because my dad is borrowing it and has not given it back to me.
Hint, hint.
Your dad listen to these?
I don't know if he does.
Your hint might go unnoticed.
And so the day I brought that in, they were voracious. How fast can I read? Can I get this whole trade read in the 80 minutes that I have for class? They were trying to get an entire trade read, 5 issues in that 80 minutes. Some were trying to go for 2. And they knew that it was gonna be a while before those class sets came in. The way my school is structured, because we're a middle college, we have semester block schedules. So this is, at this point, end of October, and they know that I only have them through the end of January. And so the way that purchase orders often work, through schools, is it takes a couple months to get your stuff in, and they know that it can be a little while before I'm getting these, and they were just trying to read as fast as they could. I was really shocked to find one of my lowest achieving students gravitating towards the books. Granted, he hadn't done the project, but at this point, it was pretty clear he wasn't going to do the project either. He was going through some really tough stuff at home at the time, and he just said, he came over to me. He said, "Look, I would just really appreciate if I could just sit and read this trade today. I'm really interested in it." It was Shadow Man. And I said, he said, this really speaks to me. And I said, sure. And he sat out in the hallway, listening to his music, because he can't be without music. He's got music in his ear, and he read. I want to say he made it through like 2, maybe 3 of the issues. And when he gave it back to me, he asked if I could write down the website of where he could buy this and the name and everything. So I gave him the information for all of the trades, and he has asked for them for Christmas from his family.
That's awesome.
So here's a kid who's not a reader who, is being hooked in because he likes that the stuff. I think that a lot of Shadow Man readers like
the stuff that I don't like.
The voodoo aspects and the darkness, and he's all about fighting your inner demons. It's very real for him.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we get for some of the songs on the playlist?
Songs on the playlist.
Because I think that's a cool thing. Like, I'm curious to see like what your students thought of when they were thinking of that character.
So here's a classic one here. The student did Charlene, and Charlene's jams are "Girl on Fire" by Alicia Keys.
Yeah.
So that seems pretty standard. T-Pain's "I'm in Love with a Stripper."
And they cite reasons why.
There are reasons.
The reasons are pretty obvious on that one.
Yeah. I feel like this whole one was like just definitely on the obvious stuff.
This was not an eternal investigation of the character.
No, this one was not. And then the last song on this playlist is "Wrecking Ball" by Miley Cyrus.
Wrecking Ball.
For Charlene.
So that's a good playlist for Charlene. I like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is that they're all informed by their personal tastes.
Do we have a playlist for Faith?
Let's see.
Are any of them gospel?
No. So let's see. Faith songs. "Fall for Your Type" by Jamie Foxx and Drake. It's about like a comic booky love type thing. "Same Love" by Macklemore, which is about just loving everybody. It's actually, I love that jam. It's one of my jams. But it's about how love is love, and that shouldn't matter who it's between. And the third song that this student chose was "Memories Back Then." She doesn't cite the artist on this one, but I think she's talking here about how it's pulling back to when she was thinking about her family and her gram and her parents dying.
Did anybody decide what the most badass Megadeth song was?
Oh yes, they did. And I hesitate to say, I'm almost positive that was one that was emailed to me that I don't have printed out in front of me. It was the student who took the Shadow Man.
Yeah.
He gave me one song, and he determined that in his mind the most badass Megadeth song was, and I forget. I'll be sure to let you know so you can pick it up later.
Yeah.
It's only continuing with the mystery of what that song is.
I'm sorry. I can look at it
In
in my
Valiant
email.
Effort Interacts episode number 6.
Do you want me to?
It will be a 2-minute
if you
episode.
want to stop the recording, I'll go look at my email.
No, it's okay.
Another Faith one was "Free Bird" by Leonard Skinner.
Oh,
Nice.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. You Got a Friend in Me by Randy Newman.
Oh
Nice.
yeah,
from Toy Story.
that's a good one.
And Defying Gravity by Indina Menzel. So I think that one.
That was a good one.
That's,
Yeah, that's a good
that's good, and it kind of stretches the gamut of like the depth of the songs. Another Faith one, Stand Tall by Dirty Heads. Even though she talks about how even though she's been kind of feeling very weak inside, she's had this power underneath. Don't Stop Believin' by Journey is the student's other one, and Let It Go. I think we all know where Let It Go came from.
Well, I mean, Nick might not, because Nick does not have a 3-year-old daughter like we do.
I'm sorry. Let It Go,
Let It Go is Frozen.
also by Indina Menzel, is
Yeah.
from Frozen. And I could wake my 3-year-old for a rendition, but she's really tired.
So you did playlist, and you have pictures. You had them draw pictures. What other ways did you interact with them? What other projects did they do, or?
We started the unit off before we even actually read Renegade's Harbinger. Harbinger Renegade. I wanted them to know why I was doing it. I'm very big on being transparent in my purpose in my classroom. So I said to them, look, we're identity is, and then we had this whole workshop on like how we define ourselves, and we came up with some nice quotes and things. And then I said, okay, but what about in fiction? Like, do characters have an identity? And then, of course, there was the requisite listing of vocabulary they needed to know, like dynamic and static and round and flat characters. But then I really wanted to get deeper than that. I said, I don't want to just label these characters. I don't want to see like a long list of adjectives in your essays. I want to see the people coming out. And I said, we're going to look at a comic where it's not just me being crazy when I say that these are real characters. This was the intent of the author. So the first thing we did, and this was hard for them, is we read an interview with Joshua Dysart. And in it, a couple of the things he says, I wanted to love and understand all people. The creator, as he talks about how real life is a big influence on his work. When a story feels lifeless, flat, borrowed, it's because it's culled together almost entirely from other fictional sources. And he says, the creator of that story isn't looking around them at the world or looking inside themselves for something real and human. No matter how high the fantasy, the reader still wants it to be driven by some touch of life and humanity. And so I said, this is why these are not characters. These are people. And, there's more quotes in here. There's more that we went through. But a lot of it just kept coming down to, like, it was a very benign interview with him where he's just talking about why he's writing Harbinger. It's not like he sat down to talk about who he was, but he said it in OTV as well. I had the kids.
Only the Valiant, which is another podcast. So you had, wait, let me get this straight. You had your students listen to another podcast about Valiant Comics. They didn't listen to my podcast about Valiant Comics.
You didn't have an interview with Dysart.
Oh, okay. So Joshua Dysart did an interview with Only the Valiant. It's a great episode, and I suggest everybody listen to it.
And in particular, my students listened to minute 13 through minute 37 of that interview. Part 1 of the interview with Joshua Dysart. And the reason they listened to those minutes is it
Because that was the book?
So actually, I had them listen to a little bit of the end of that issue 5. So a little bit of what they were listening to was the end of issue 5, where Dysart talks about decisions he made regarding Toyo and the relationship between Chris and Peter. And so he talks a little bit about that. And then there's, after they finish talking about the issue, it just it doesn't quite just break off. There's some more continued discussion about the characters themselves, and in particular, some very revealing things about, where he wanted to go with Charlene.
Yes, I remember that part of the interview.
Yeah,
yes.
You would not believe how alert those kids were. They're like, say what?
Dysart wanted to have a little bit more of Charlene's sexuality in that episode, in that issue. So,
in particular, his sanity was questioned by some of my students when, very memorably, he noted that he wanted an image of Charlene with her hand down her diaper, masturbating. Which, Warren...
Really?
Yeah,
Warren Simon said no.
My kid's like, yeah, of course he said no, that's weird. They were with them for a lot of other things, but they drew the line there. It was actually it was right after that day that we actually were reading and discussing the Flamingo arc. Issue is what is actually this unit. This section was actually I had an observation. I had a formal observation by my principal while teaching this, and I had rave reactions from him about student engagement. And in particular, once, by the time you get to Flamingo's issue, they're a couple issues in, they're a couple deep, and they're better at reading it themselves and guiding it themselves. So he really enjoyed the fact that they were looking at it from the point of view of what they could learn. I mean, we pretty much just went page by page through it to review it, and he was lit up about that. He was very excited.
Tune in next episode of Valiant Effort Interacts, where we discuss how Karyn was able to convince the school faculty that Valiant Comics has the potential to be a good teaching tool to young adults. But before we go, we'd like to share with you a quick interview of how the kids felt about our class, straight from our own students.
Did you enjoy Harbinger Renegades? I did. I loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I really adored the characters, the way the story was told, everything. Oh, that basically answers why or why not. So, had you read comics before? I've not actually read many comic books, but I know a lot about the lore and the stories and things, because I am basically a huge nerd. What was your favorite part of the Identity Unit? I really loved reading Harbinger. That was my favorite part. I always found the story really gripping and the characters really compelling, so I actually continued reading it from Karyn's personal collection. Would you recommend teaching using comics? I would, because I think it's a really good way to pull in people who aren't necessarily good with learning with just blocks of text. It breaks it up with visuals and makes it a little more real seeming to most people, and I think that's really a good thing. And yeah, that's about it. So